This event is going to be so special. And I'm so glad you all are here to learn, to live, and love. So my name is Nicole Fisher. I'm the marketing and online support for A Global Voice of Peace. We are so excited to have this event today, which is the first of 4 dates that'll focus on gender world to be or who to be with Dr. Marilyn Volker and co-presenter, well, she's producer also, Jessica Lamb. My role today is to monitor the chat box and be sure that any questions or any comments that you have get relayed to the speakers. And just for some housekeeping, if you can keep yourself muted at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side, there's a little mute button. If you can pop that mute button, that would be terrific. Just so we can make sure that all of our attention is in the right place. So for now, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing Gillian Soleil, who is the creative director of A Global Voice of Peace website. She's been planning for this event and many more like it for years. Gillian is a terrific and dear friend of mine, and I want to say congratulations to her to getting us to this point. And my dear, the floor is yours.
Okay, now I got tears. Rehearsal is different. The real thing, oh my God, between that and you, and I have to say that Nico has been on this journey of A Global Voice of Peace with me for 4 years. She's white-knuckled it with me, and I'm just so blessed to have her. And thank you so much, Nico. And Smita, who is muted, but she just joined our team too. She'll figure out how this thing goes. So I want to welcome all of you and say aloha for joining us on this first week of a 4-week series. That's going to be amazing because of who the presenters are. So how many of you have struggled with your own identity of who you are and who you want to be, who you want to share your life with, and what you want to do with your life? So many of us have grown up overshadowed by the social, religious, ethnic, and cultural moral compass of our families and the societies we live in. Our basic need to be exactly who we are, who we know we are in our essence, want to express it, and need to express it throughout our life, to be the piece of being peace that you are meant to be. For the next 4 weeks, we have the extreme pleasure of being with 2 amazing experts in the field of gender identity, sexual behavior, and all the issues associated with claiming who you are. Dr. Marilyn Volker, my dear friend of almost 35 years, oh my, sexologist and sexuality educator, is one of the most accepting, loving, non-judgmental people I know. She's the Dalai Lama without robes. Marilyn's colleague and co-presenter Jessica Lamb is a powerful force as a proud activist, educator, philanthropist, ally, and advocate for gay, lesbian, and gender issues. Marilyn and Jessica will shed light on and open us to a world that society has not considered the norm based on gender and sexual behavior choices and the struggles of how to be in society. We will meet real people with real stories. Maybe you'll find some answers here for yourself. Today's focus is on language and labels, terminology, meanings, differentiations. They will be introducing sexual identity in the areas of biology, gender identity, gender role, and orientation. As we enter into this fascinating foray of the gender world and all its challenges, I'm thrilled to welcome Marilyn and Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for an honor which it is for both of us. And of course, because Gillian, you and I have known each other for a long, long time, I know this has been your dream, sign language for dreams, something you have in your brain, and you have to go way out here to get that. And that's the same for a lot of people who are struggling with gender. They have something inside their heart and their brain, and they have to go to many, many places to get to be who they are, because masquerading of somebody you're not is really exhausting, really exhausting. I have had the privilege of working with so many people, from little children, teens, adults, spouses, family members, from people who are willing to be honest about themselves. And so I've also had the honor to work with Jessica in so many arenas, and we train together. So I'm going to have Jessica to introduce, and also to say, this may not only be for you, it may be for a family member, it may be for some friend that you know, and that you may be the person who may be able to help them out as well. So it is truly an honor. And I'm going to have Jessica introduce herself, and then we can start.
We'll kick it right off. So the honor is truly mine. So thank you so much for having us here today, because there's just so much to unpack. And we only have, what, an hour with you today? So I don't know how much we can get crammed into that 1 hour. But I'm Jessica Lamb. I'm the Vice President of the Transgender Certification Association. Part of our job there is to educate professionals in their fields, therapists, nurses. As a matter of fact, for our next training, we have a doctor who's also an obstetrician and a gynecologist. And we educate them on how to work with this gender expansive and gender diverse population. And so just to kind of kick us off into what transgender is all about, I'm going to go ahead and show you my presentation here. And so this is our trans evolution of the last decade. So we're only really going to get into some terms here, but we always like to start off with a little introduction, right? So hello, my name is Jessica. And now, and what a lot of kids are doing now is introducing themselves with their pronouns. And my pronouns are, well, whatever you want to call me, he, she, as long as you just call me. That's how I always say. But you may get kids tell you something differently. They may say, oh, call me by they and them pronouns. And you're going to say they and them. Is that proper English? Well, as a matter of fact, it is. As is 2015, it is proper English. So let's talk about some of the new terminologies and vocabulary around gender. So we're going to get into some umbrella terms. And let's watch a quick little video here. I'm only going to play a little bit for you. So
offers the option, you can play with this doll or you can play with this ball, and the boy chooses the ball. My theory is because early humans, like the men, as far as I'm concerned, hunted.
I mean, is there a reason why the men were the ones hunting?
Probably because they were stronger.
Hi, I'm Nanta.
Hi, I'm Willow.
Willow, nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Brianna.
Hey, Brianna, I'm Nanta. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Okay, so can I start asking questions?
Kids always want to ask
You
questions.
said think of some questions and be prepared. I'm prepared.
Do you know why we're here today?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
I think it has something to do like gender non-binary or non-conforming.
Yeah, both. Yeah, so gender non-conforming and non-binary.
What's gender non-conforming?
Well, what do you think it is?
Something about gender, because I hear the word gender in it.
Do I look like a girl to you?
Yes.
Well, what if I told you that sometimes, though, I feel more like a boy?
That's okay.
So binary, boy and a girl. So non-binary, meaning
The opposite.
Yeah, exactly. That's a bunch of crock, right? You can be one end, the other end, or anywhere in between.
Or anywhere in between. So what does that mean? Let's talk about, so it's time to consider some new umbrellas. Before, there used to be just the one umbrella to describe the transgender community. And transgender meaning this can be somebody who is just non-binary, who doesn't conform to today's binary of boy or girl. So, but we've gone to expand that. So, but first, before we start to understand that, let's talk about the intersection of gender identity. Go ahead, Marilyn.
And when I was starting almost 50 years ago, there was only 2 words. You were either transvestite or transsexual. That was it. That was it, with nothing in between, as well as there was only male or female with nothing in between. So let's see what we've learned. And what I love about those young people is they were so comfortable asking and considering. That's what I really love to see about young people.
Yeah, no, and given the freedom, most children will ask the first thing that comes to their mind. So if they know there's a safe space to express, they're going to share with you the first thing they're thinking about. They're not afraid to walk up to you and say, are you a girl? You know, based on just what we call our props and cues, our gender props and cues. But let's talk about this intersection of what gender identity is. So, you know, there's 4 different components to all this. So there's what you're assigned at birth, which essentially is what you're made of. So these are your XX or XY. And now, you know, typically these days, a doctor will decide on gender on what's in between the legs. But as we're coming to learn, it's not always about what's in between their legs. What's in between their legs defines what part of the reproduction process this person might play, but it doesn't really assign them a gender. Gender is something that comes somewhere else. Go ahead, Marilyn.
And when I was working at the Mailman Center for Child Development, we were seeing that there were a lot more. We like to think that anybody with a vagina would just get an XX, or anybody with a penis would get an XY. But we saw if you had an extra chromosome, well, you would be, I'm going to use the word blessed, by having Down syndrome. Oh, and then we learn about it. And then if you had another XXY, oh, you got another female chromosome. What would that mean to gender? So I was.
Why do you have an extra chromosome? No pun intended. So then there's, of course, okay, so you're assigned this at birth. I'm boy, I'm girl, right? So they tell you this, right? So then there's this gender expression. This is what I'm presenting to the world. Because sometimes you look at clothing and you say, well, I don't like that. I don't want to wear a dress. And so sometimes when a girl doesn't want to wear a dress and jump up in trees, we say, oh, that's a tomboy, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm wearing feminine clothing, I feel that my body's more feminine, and I feel that my body is masculine when I'm wearing more masculine clothing. What do we define as masculine and feminine? Well, that's changed over the course of time, right? But the bottom line is my view of the gender of my body can change depending on my perspective at the time. So a lot of people may flow with gender expression, and that might be okay. Gender identity, however, goes a little deeper than that. And this is about the question of who I am. So I am a girl, I am a boy, or I am something in between, or I am neither, or I am both, right? So, and then often confused with gender identity is sexual orientation. So who do I like? Most people will assume, well, because I've got a penis in between my legs must mean that I must be attracted to someone with a vagina between their legs. As we know, that's not always the case. So that is a basic. Now, the intersection of all of these in the middle of all of this is non-conformity, when things don't go in a straight line in what we might call somebody who identifies as cisgender. But you can be cisgender and still like same sex. So that is, it can be very confusing. So we're going to talk about this. So these are the umbrella terms. These are the broadening of these commonly held definitions of gender perceived norms. Gender expansive. This is the umbrella term that we now use to describe people that expand the notions of gender expression and identity, or what's perceived as the expected gender norms for their society, or by context, depending on what maybe that birth certificate might say. So some of the various umbrellas and what I like to call this tent term of a gender expansive term. So gender expansive kind of opens up the world to a lot of expansiveness. So we have cisgender. Cisgender means that what I feel about my gender identity here in my mind matches what I see in between my legs when I look in the mirror. So
nobody has to say, oh, hi, I'm Marilyn and I'm cisgender. And that's interesting because as we begin to see these other terms, is that when people feel different, oh, I have a place, I have a name. Oh, which name do I identify with? Which term?
Another umbrella, when that is not congruent, then we may say this person is transgender. However, transgender is a term that we've sort of evolved, and now instead of using the term transgender, we may say this person is gender non-conforming. So that is another umbrella term. And I'm going to go underneath all these umbrellas, just like Rihanna does under her song Umbrella Ella, right? So, and then there's non-binary. So non-binary doesn't necessarily mean it's about gender identity. It just means maybe they don't identify with the binary, or it could mean that this person may be intersexual. So they have parts of both genders. So non-binary can be a little bit, and then there's genderqueer. Genderqueer is absolutely not about the gender identity of this person. It typically is about gender expression. And sometimes a genderqueer person may not go to see a therapist to look for hormones or for surgeries or for any of those things, because this is more about presentation, about an identity of sorts, of that I do not conform with the traditional society norms of what gender might be defined. And we might find some genderqueer people throughout the world. So cisgender, so a term for people whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth: cis male, cis female, right? So here's the transgender umbrella. Sometimes this term is used broadly as an umbrella term to describe anyone whose gender identity differs from that assigned sex. It can also be used more narrowly as a gender identity that reflects a binary gender identity that is opposite or even across from the sex they were assigned at birth. These identities can overlap under the umbrellas. So let's look at what's under this transgender, or what we call for short GNC, not the vitamin, gender nonconforming, GNC. Let's see what kind of terms may fall under this gender nonconforming umbrella. So there's the term trans. This is the abbreviated form of transgender. So it's a term that can be used as an abbreviation, either transgender or transsexual, or as an umbrella term in the same way that transgender is used. And then there's, of course, trans asterisks. You may see trans asterisks. Some non-binary and other gender non-conforming people use trans asterisks. Now, with the asterisks, it's actually pronounced not trans asterisks, because most trans people say, I'm not an asterisk, but trans star. That's what that means, trans star, to indicate that they're definitely not cisgendered, but not necessarily a trans woman or man either. There is a sort of cisgender umbrella under the transgender umbrella, and I'll show you that in a moment. But society has often seen, people who do not conform to gender identity as someone who may be a transvestite. A transvestite's a term that came out in the late 19th century by Magnus Hirschfeld, who is a sexologist in Germany, who said, this is a person who doesn't conform to society norms of gender. So this person is a transvestite, one of the earliest terms that we would use to pathologize somebody who is gender nonconforming. But later in the 20th century, the term transvestite became a derogatory type term, usually used for somebody with some sort of perversion of some sort. And so a lot of people who identified with the term transvestite didn't like that word anymore, because I'm not perverted, I'm a cross-dresser. And so cross-dressers might have looked something similar to this person right here. So, maybe some people would say, oh, this looks like a man wearing a dress. Now, clearly this person wearing this outfit here doesn't feel like a man when they're dressed this way. This is the way they express their gender, is in this way. So this might have been someone that may have, and this picture might have been taken in the 1960s or 70s. This person may have said, oh, I'm a transvestite, or I'm a cross-dresser. I'm a female cross-dresser. And they could be heterosexual males. They could be happily married men who sometimes wanted to dress up in feminine clothing. And sometimes their partners were okay with it. Some were not, so they might have done this in secret. Marilyn, you want to go ahead and comment?
The interesting part of it is how they coped with, remember, this is gender expression. This is how we present. And in those days, because we didn't have all these great prezzies and we didn't have people to teach, that it was really done in a lot of secret. In the 1970s, when I first started, I met a lot of people who had to dress in secret. And so the word transvestite was there. And a lot of young people, even though they felt like they wanted to dress, felt that they had to deny it and cope. And that's what, remember, we're talking about gender expression.
So another term that we may refer to somebody who might cross-dress in the opposite gender clothing is the term drag. So we may see drag as this term as a drag queen or a drag king, let's see what today's modern drag looks like. And this is here, young little person.
2018. There's gonna be drag kids in the world.
Drag kids.
And I'm one of them.
And that's one of them right there. Now, Desmond is a cisgendered young man. He's happy with his penis. I believe he's what, 13 now.
I got into drag when I watched the first episode of Rupaul's Drag Race. I stopped playing with my toys because my mom was watching it. I liked how they looked so fabulous, and I wanted to be like that. So I would take my mom's towels, bed sheets, etc., and her heels, and put them on, and then walk down the hallway, etc.
Etc.
I would try to look like Courtney, but it would turn out to look like a disastrous monster. Monstrosity.
And that is Desmond, or the Amazing Desmond. If you want to look him up online, he's the Amazing Desmond. So check out Desmond. So Desmond's part of a culture of drag queening and drag kinging. And, you know, and mom seems to be okay with it. This is a way that mom allows their child to express themselves. And maybe our next meeting we'll do about drag kids and gender. Go ahead, Marilyn.
It's really interesting because it can be very confusing, first of all, not to the child who knows exactly, because I've worked with a lot of little children who were born with penises that come in and say, I'm a girl, or I want to wear this, or somebody born with a vagina, I'm a boy, and they could be really young. And it can be very confusing to a parent who doesn't have this information. So I'm very grateful for you, Gillian and Nico, for really offering this to everyone. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So it's important. I mentioned earlier that Desmond was a cisgendered young boy. Is happy with penis. You know, let's talk about another famous drag queen that we all know. And Desmond got his start with Rupaul, one of the most famous cross-dressers. And let me ask you a question and think to yourself, well, does Rupaul want to have gender reassignment surgery and remove his penis and get a vagina? And does Rupaul want to take hormones and transition and develop breasts and all that? No, Rupaul has never expressed that he has desired to have any surgeries or any alterations to his body to transform it. But Rupaul loves to get fabulous and dress up in clothes. So Rupaul is what we would consider, and let's look at the 4 components, right? So Rupaul is a cisgendered man, so assigned male at birth. Penis is okay, right? Sexual orientation is what? Well, Rupaul is a gay man, so attracted to men, so likes other people with other penises. And let's talk about gender expression. Gender expression is what? Gender expression is depending on what day it is. But typically speaking, gender expression for Rupaul is in male presentation mode unless he is presenting as Rupaul. So gender expression can change and can evolve depending on what is going on that particular day for him. And gender identity for Rupaul is that of a male. Why? Because what was assigned at birth and what he identifies as is congruent. This is a cisgendered man who likes to present in drag. But who's not? So what's the opposite of cisgender? Transsexual. So go ahead, Marilyn.
I was just going to say the easiest way, because there's a lot of words coming, is if you remember, the biology is your chromosomes, hormones, and what you were born with. Although there can be some differences, we call intersex. Number 2, gender identity. If you remember, between your ears, what do I feel like? Number 3, gender presentation. What are the props that I use to present? And number 4, orientation. Who am I attracted to? If you keep that in mind as we're presenting and where do they fall under these 4, it makes it a lot easier to understand complexities. Go for it.
The 2 big ones that I always say is sexual orientation and gender identity. If you can separate those 2 pieces, this will be a little more clear for you. So think about yourself. Put yourself in this situation. Tonight, you go to sleep. Tomorrow, you wake up and, oh my goodness, I had this in between my legs last night, and today it's the opposite. So you went to bed with the vagina and woke up with the penis, or you went to bed with the penis and woke up with the vagina. Think to yourself for a moment, if this really happened to you, how would you feel? And tell me, would that change who you're attracted to? Most likely the answer would be no. But you might want to say to yourself, this is kind of cool. I might want to try it to see if I like it. So, but it really doesn't change who you're attracted to. So think about that for a moment. So in that moment, you're going to say to yourself, well, that doesn't belong there. It wasn't there the night before. So you may be having some thoughts of being trapped in the wrong gender identity. So think about that for yourself and put yourself in that position. It might help you understand. Now, a transsexual individual, this is someone who wants to take hormones, who possibly may want to take surgery, have surgeries. And so we talk about this transsexual and many times as preoperative, so pre-op for short, or post-op, post-operative for short, right? So pre-op or post-op transsexual. So this is someone who who is on their journey to have surgery or hormones, or could be somebody who has already done. Now, post-op doesn't always necessarily mean that they had an operation. Post-op can mean that this person's been on hormones for 8 years of their life, doesn't desire to have any surgeries, but may consider themselves post-op because they are transitioned. So there is F to M, female to male, and there's M to F. So you may hear a pre-op transsexual F to M, or a post-op transsexual M to F, male to female, right? We're just confusing you. This is where we start developing a trans binary, if you will. So you have a trans man and a trans woman. I find that people get this confused and may say a trans woman is a person who was born a woman. No, a trans woman is someone who has, in some cases, maybe post-op M to F, and now identifies in the binary term as maybe woman or trans woman. So time for me to come out for you right now. I am a trans woman. I was born with M on my birth certificate. So I was born with male designation at birth. And that's what we say. We don't say born a man or born a woman because you're born babies. But you are assigned at birth. So now we're using terminology like you're assigned this at birth. So I was assigned male at birth. I was raised in a family that raised me as a young boy with all the stereotypes that are involved with all of that. But I knew somewhere inside that there was something different. So that we all have this question, right? At some point in your life, and it doesn't matter where in the world you were born, you will come to question yourself and say, who am I? Where do I belong in this world? How do I fit into this puzzle piece of this planet? And that question of who am I, well, that defines you. That's what makes you you. And for me, that answer of who am I, somewhere deep inside said, well, I'm a woman. I know this is my inevitability somehow, some way, someplace, somehow. I just don't know how I'm going to get there. That was what my journey was. And my journey was exactly that. So at one point, I was a pre-op transsexual, M to F. And then I became a post-op transsexual, M to F, and identified as a trans woman. And in some cases, I dropped the trans and say, I'm a woman today. So, and you may want to ask somebody where they are. Now, these always overlap with one another. Some person may identify one way one day and another day, another day. Maybe this person might be intersex. What is intersex? Well, this is a variation of characteristics, means that the sex characteristics are ambiguous in the context of male or female sex binary. This is someone that we may have called hundreds and hundreds of years ago as a hermaphrodite. And have we heard this term hermaphrodite before? Sure we have. And do you know who was a hermaphrodite? I'll give you a hint. This February, we celebrate a holiday called Valentine's Day. On Valentine's Day, we have a little character. Can anybody speak up and tell me what the name of that character is? Cupid, drop back your bow. That's right, little Cupid. Let me ask you a question. Is Cupid a boy or is Cupid a girl? Some people might say, oh, Cupid's a boy. Some people might say Cupid's a girl. Do we ever see genitalia on Cupid? No, Cupid is usually covered in that area, so you don't know. Cupid is actually a hermaphrodite. And how do we know that Cupid's a hermaphrodite? Cupid is the child or the offspring of Hermes and Aphrodite. Put the two together, and what do you get? Oh my goodness, hermaphrodite. So does that mean that this existed back in the Greek Empire, way back in the day during, yes, it did, as a matter of fact. So there are lots of different terms, and we'll go over some more of it in a second. Go ahead, Marilyn.
The interesting part is we didn't have the word intersex at that time. So anybody who was born with, let's say, genitals that looked like one or the other or both, we called everybody in that whole group hermaphrodite. But until we began to do chromosome tests and hormone tests, then we put them under this broad range of intersex. And it also could mean somebody say, I feel intersex, whether they had a chromosome test or not. The teenagers that I teach, they always wonder why at 2000 and now at 21, why don't they do more than look between the legs at birth? Why don't they offer a chromosome test? Why don't they offer a hormone test? Why don't they do a brain scan? Because there are differences between male brain and female brain, no matter what's between the legs. So
and there was a scientific study in the 1970s which proved that. So interesting that the term intersex really did not become popularized, and only became popularized because people who identified in this area did not like the term hermaphrodite. Don't call me a hermaphrodite. I'm sort of intersex. And so intersex is a term we really use more towards the end of the 20th century. And it was interesting. I was just watching a TV show recently. Who likes the show Quantum Leap? Quantum Leap, where Sam jumps into bodies of people in the past and then lives their lives. And there was one episode where Sam leapt into the body of a woman, and then his partner comes out and says, oh, you're like a hermaphrodite now, and even then, that show was produced in the late 80s, early 90s. They were still using terminologies like hermaphrodite, which was inappropriate because in that sense, that character was not a hermaphrodite. So another term that we may hear, and this is 21st century language now, intergender. Intergender is a gender identity that's between or among or in the midst of the binary genders. And this has to do more with male or masculine and female and feminine. So not necessarily about body parts. Okay, so could be about. So like I mentioned earlier, many identities will overlap under other umbrellas. Here's the other umbrellas we talked about: genderqueer, gender variant. Okay, let's talk about some more gender expansive terms: non-binary. So recently we were sort of attacked by some Facebook group because we didn't use the term non-binary in some of the language that we use. This is an umbrella term for gender identities that are not exclusively masculine or feminine. So let's talk about it's both an identity and an umbrella term for identities that exist outside the gender binary. Okay, so these are some of the terms you might hear under this umbrella term, non-binary. A quick little video so you could just watch some of these individuals.
There's a whole variety of experiences that people have that cause them to question, like, hey, maybe I don't actually fit into the definition of, man or woman, and that there's something else.
Hi, I'm Danny, and I identify as non-binary.
I'm Lindsay, and I identify as non-binary.
My name is Femme. I identify as non-gendered person.
I'm Francois. I identify as genderqueer.
My name is James, and I identify as non-binary.
Non-binary is someone whose gender doesn't fall within the context of the binary that we set up in society.
I am not male, I'm not female, I'm somewhere floating around in there.
Non-binary means acknowledging a wider range of experience.
For me, it means that I'm not identified with any specific gender, like male, female, or other things.
So there you have some individuals who identify as non-binary. So here's some of the terms you might hear here. Agender, having no specific gender identity or having a gender identity that is neutral, sometimes used interchangeably with the term gender neutral, or genderless, or neutral. So that was one that bigender, having two distinct gender identities or expression either simultaneously or at different times or in different situation, bigendered. So interesting.
Doesn't mean they're bisexual. Please remember that. Remember, this is about gender. Could be bisexual, but it doesn't mean that.
Or they could be, what's the term we might use is pangender, And pangender could mean it's about what my heart feels and it's not about what my part feels. Right. And then there's the pansexual, which is about, okay, it's about heart, not part. So this is somebody who might be attracted to. The term pansexual is important, and I'm going to bring this up right now. The term pansexual is important. Why is it important? And it's especially important for individuals who may be involved with somebody who identifies as transgender. So let's just say for a moment that here's this man and here's this woman. They have been together for 20 years. They met when they were in college and they fell in love and they got married and they had children and they've been together all this time. But this man over here said, was hiding a secret all his life, and finally comes out to his wife and said, honey, I've been struggling with this so much, and I don't feel that I'm a man, and I feel that I'm a woman, and I would like to transition to become a woman. Oh, wow. 20 years later and children later, this woman says, I really don't understand that. How could you be that way? There might be some argument that happens between them. But in the end, this woman says, I took a vow to you and I said, till death do us part, in sickness and in health, I'm going to stick with you through this. Let's figure this out. Maybe let's go talk to a therapist about this. Let's go to a support group. So this man starts to transition. This wife decides to be on board with it. Now this man becomes a woman. And here's this other woman who is married to her partner. Does that mean now that when this woman, who used to be a man, is now with this partner who is a cisgendered woman, does that mean the cisgendered woman becomes a lesbian? What's their sex life going to be like, I wonder?
And also remember, it can be so confusing, really confusing. And so a lot of our young people, or the newer terms, use the term, I'm pansexual because I'm attracted to you, hearts, not parts, or whatever happens to your parts.
Exactly. So this woman right here, if someone were to question her, to put a label on her, oh, does that mean you're a lesbian now? She's like, well, I married a man. I'm not really attracted to women. I'm still with this person because I love them for who they are. So maybe the term I can use right now is pansexual, heart, not parts. I'm attracted to this person, how they have treated me in life, and I made a commitment and I love this person, so I might be pansexual. So that might be a term that they may feel comfortable using. That's why pansexual is such an important term to the transgender community.
Yes,
some other terms that are non-binary, we have Demi Girl, Demi Guy. These are terms for identities that have a partial connection to a certain gender. There's a fluid flux, an individual with a gender that moves between two or more gender and can fluctuate in intensity. Gender fluid can also be with fluid flux there, moving between two or more gender identity or expressions. Gender fluid, gender flux, okay, range of intensity, other interchange. So those are interchangeable, gender flux and gender fluid. Neutral, relating to a person who has a neutral gender identity or who lacks a specific gender. I see this term neutral very popular in places like Australia, Great Britain. Abroad, this term is more popular out there as neutral. So it's sometimes used as an adjective as well. NB or NB, NB being the abbreviation for non-binary, or the phonetic spelling NB, which is a person whose gender identities and expressions are outside the gender binary, right? Pangender, so we were talking about pansexual, pangender. This is a person whose gender identity is not limited to one gender and may encompass all genders at once. Can also be used in the term omnigender. Polygender means many genders and referring to people that experience more than one gender, usually more than three. So neither male nor female or both, right? So third gender, having a gender identity or expression that is not defined in terms of binary options. Now, there are countries in the world that identify with people who are third gender. So they realize it's not just male, it's just not female. There's a third gender. There's the third gender people in India, the Hijra, who identify as third gender. So this is the third gender in India. More term, two-spirit. This is a popular one here in the Americas. This is a person who identifies as having both masculine and feminine spirit. This dates back thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. The Native Americans, those who identify as two-spirit, were the luckiest people in their tribe. Instead of being ostracized and put in their place, yeah, they were put in their place, in a place of high stature, because this person, how unique and special this person can be, that they can experience genders in two different ways. Go ahead, Marilyn.
When I was at some of the the WASP group, the World Association of Sexology meetings, and was able to go to different countries, and to have somebody say we were blessed with a two-spirited child, and that, wow, we were so lucky and to have that. So really there, if you grew up in a culture that you know this, then it may not be so confusing. But when I look at all this, holy cow, when you go to a doctor's office and you only have 2 spaces, or you're trying as a parent to explain about your child, holy cow. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, what is this? And so these terms, by the way, they're all going to be kind of old school to my great grandchildren.
Probably. Although Two-Spirit has survived for quite some time. And in Hawaii, they used the term amahu. Amahu is somebody who's two-spirited. So that's that. So you'll have that in different cultures. In Native American cultures, they might have been referred to as the Bradash, which is not really a great term, because Bradash means that this was a kept boy or a slave boy. But again, they were celebrated. Now, it wasn't until, Western civilization came to the Americas and witnessed these two-spirited individuals who were celebrated, thought it was blasphemous to God. And, some conquistadors would come and actually try to eliminate them from the face of the earth. And Oscar del Balboa de Nunez from Spain came and murdered hundreds of these individuals. By throwing them into pits with dogs, and said that this was blasphemous to God. So, society has come. And you had something, Gillian, you wanted to say?
Yes. I'm just listening and looking at the children on the video, and I just wonder, how do the children who sometimes get into a peer pressure group somehow get swept up to peer pressure, and their peers are doing this, they're dressing this way, they're becoming all these different terms, but they really don't know where they belong? So have you come across the issue where a child is swept up in peer pressure rather than this is who I am or this is what I feel? Some people like Desmond are right out there. He's really clear. But so how have you found the peer pressure as part of this whole scenario?
That can help. Yes, that can happen with a lot of things. With a lot of things where children grow up if they feel pressure. Now, there are some children from the very beginning who very clearly, no matter what's between their legs, and they are what we call PIC, persistent, insistent, consistent. Now that child is not going to get caught up. They may be scared to say something unless they have a family that's supportive and learns about it. And their family may have to go through steps. But are there students who may be like, ooh, I saw this on a YouTube, or I saw this on that show that Jessica was talking about, and that, ooh, maybe I'd like to do that as well. And Jessica, you've been in many teenage presentations, and Jessica helped start one of our first LGBT, especially the T groups. And I'm interested to see your comments, because it's a great question about students.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see how, with the more education that gets out there, the more it becomes accepted, right, by others and part of our society. So, oh, this is a group of individuals who feel this certain way. Now, who wouldn't want to be part of a group that says, oh, you're beautiful just the way you are. You want to be a girl? Great. You look amazing. How awesome do you look? You want to be a boy? Oh my gosh, you look so handsome. Who wouldn't want to be part of that culture of just general acceptance? Be who you are. It doesn't matter who you are. And so some kid may say, maybe bullied in school for whatever reason, or maybe doesn't feel like they belong in one place or another. So think about yourself, right? When we were in middle school, like it or not, we had our cliques. We had, it was during lunchtime. That's when you decided where you felt you belonged. And we all want to belong somewhere. That's just human nature. So you would either gravitate to the popular kids. We all wanted to be popular kids, or we wanted to be with those weird kids because they were cool. Somewhere along the way between the 80s and 90s, it became cool to be a geek or a freak. You know, it was okay to be somebody who was a nerd. Nerds, you know, Revenge of the Nerds, that movie from the 80s changed everything for the nerds, you know. And so, oh my gosh, how cool. You know how to operate a computer? Amazing. That's pretty cool. Now, who's to say that this child who now starts to associate with these individuals who may identify under the non-binary, or let's get to the next term, which is genderqueer. Okay, so genderqueer, this is the umbrella term that doesn't identify with conventional gender identities. For some, genderqueer is a non-binary identification. For others, it's not. It's separate umbrella from transgender or even non-binary, because this person doesn't always identify under the dominant transgender narrative. This is the popular group right now, your genderqueer individuals. So, you know, let's say a kid ends up, you know, here in this place. And as Marilyn was saying, and I call them, she calls it PIC, I call it ICPs, because I think Insane Clown Posse from the 1990s, and that's what helps me remember it. But ICP, insistent, consistent, persistent. So if you're a therapist, what's important to really communicate to someone who's trans, or if you're running a support group, it's consequences of our actions. We all have consequences. So what are the consequences of me starting to take hormones? What are the consequences of me having surgeries? You know, and there are consequences to those actions. And these are things that need to be considered. We're getting more and more individuals where the population of people, what we call detransitioners, people who transition and then decide, oh, this isn't for me, and so I'm going to go back to the gender I was. This is a detransitioner. That was a very small population back in the day. There was a lot of what we would call gatekeeping and hoops that they would have to jump through. But now that it's become more socially acceptable, and now that we're starting to see more peer groups getting involved around here, we might start to see that gap widen. And we have started to see that gap widen. We've seen people who have transitioned, detransition, transition again, and detransition again. And we might see them go back and forth. You know, again, is this consistent behavior? Is this persistent behavior? Go ahead, Marilyn.
Which is why we just don't go. A well-trained therapist is going to, and endocrinologist is not just going to be throwing hormones out to somebody who says that. There is a process to go through. However, if somebody identifies, and both Jessica and I have been in many, many classrooms over the years, is that once people begin to see, there are people who say, well, I'm not that. Oh, okay. But they can also then understand if somebody says, well, I might be that. And looking at consequences absolutely is not just, as we're going to go through this process and you'll hear it, it's not just about hormones. It's not just about surgery. There are legal things. There are, how does family respond? Who do you disclose and how? And we got the big B issue, the bathroom issue. And how do you then look at your life goals? So there's a lot to consider. The reason that I like these terminologies is that it gives students, especially young students, but everyone, oh, let me find my place. Let me see what.
And this is why we're now using more gender expansive terms. So it's not this or that. If you were diagnosed transsexual, that meant your path was hormones, surgery, and placement in the gender identity you identify as. But it's a little more complex than that, and there's more involved to it. And so now we have terms like this right over here, genderqueer. And so we may have heard this term before as maybe as androgynous, right? Think back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, we had David Bowie, who was all in this glam style. Think about even men of the 1980s in these rock bands with the long hair and makeup. Think also Boy George, and these are people who may identify as genderqueer. This is a person whose biological sex is not readily apparent, may intermediate between two gender identities. This person may also reject gender roles all entirely. So an androgynous person. We might have used the term unisex also, right. Or metrosexual. Those are some other terms we might have used.
Remember that. And by the way, remember it's androgyny. male, female, and the feminists that came along in the 70s when I was teaching, they went, wait, I want to call it gynandrous. So they put, here's another new word, they put the female first. So you're going to see all kinds of words. And now we get butch.
Yeah,
and
I think gynandrous, and I think of somebody who's butch, right? As a guy. So, but here's another term, butch or femme. Holding a non-binary gender identity as butch or femme. This is all about gender expression. So a real femme can do it herself. A real butch won't let her. All right, that's a little humor for you there. But here we go. There's a picture of and this is the same person, dressed very feminine and dressed very butch. Is this person is probably a cisgendered individual, doesn't want to have any surgeries or hormones, but likes to present sometimes male, sometimes female, and they identify these with basically the society's fashion choices of the day. So it's interesting to see how fashion has evolved over time. So absolutely.
If you're really going to take time to understand yourself and someone else, to think about those 4 parts of sexual identity, and then the range. So thank you.
All right, so quickly to move forward, we're going to do NB, and we saw that one under the other umbrella, but it also falls here under the genderqueer umbrella, excuse me, derived from the abbreviation of non-binary. This is going to be an NB friend, can be a neutral, romantic, or sexual partner term. Gender bender, here's a popular one. So a person who combines attributes of different genders and who identifies as a gender blender, or one of the favorite ones that kids like to use is a gender fuck. Ever been in a shopping mall where you saw the back of somebody with really long hair, very slender frame, and then they turn around and they have a full beard and you have a WTF moment, right? What is, I thought it was a woman, but it turns out to be a man, because there's the props were all feminine, but the cues were all masculine. So this is and they do this essentially to blur those lines, is to confuse you, to mix and to really work against the culture standard and stereotyped gender expressions. Go ahead, Gillian.
Yeah. As you're bringing up these terms, when I first started talking to Marilyn about this, my curiosity was, how come males are called gays and female lesbians? I never understood those 2 terms and their application.
Well, the clinical term was heterosexual and homosexual. Sure. And then there was bisexual, we got to, but really, I don't ever have to say, hi, I'm Marilyn, I'm cisgender, I'm heterosexual. I never have to say that. When you don't fall into that category, and I say of privilege and of the majority, unless you go to a community, all right, where I'm the minority, and I have been, all right, is that gay was a term that a lot of people used at the beginning as a password, like, ooh, we went to Uncle Charlie's and had a gay time. Now, if you were a gay or lesbian person, if you were a homosexual, is that, oh, that's a password. I know the club you went to, and it was a password. And so gay was used because homosexual, it's not all about sex. Neither is heterosexual all about sex. To answer the lesbian question, if we were on the island of Lesbos, 612 BC, we'd all be called lesbians. Don't you love this? Don't you love, like, American? Okay.
Yes, and I identify as lesbian too, so I speak lesbianese. So
you do. And there was on that island a woman named Sappho, and she was married to a guy, and she really loved women. And so if you ever read any poems by Sappho, and that's why they say sophistry, okay? Those are how some of the terms came, because the clinical terms, heterosexual, homosexual, was like, oh, there was too clinical, and it's not just about sex. And that's a great question.
And very specifically, when we're using those terms, we're talking about sexual orientation. What we're really talking about here is gender identity. Remember, those are different things. So sometimes, however, we may have this term and we may say it's derogatory at one point. If you called somebody a homosexual or you called them gay, that was a derogatory term at some point. And at some point, gay was, oh, I'm gay. And gay became an umbrella term for the entire community, whether you were a lesbian or if you were if you identified as homosexual in any which way, you were part of that gay community. Here's girl fag, guy dyke, right? So here's a person who's attracted to gay and bi or lesbian bi. They may or may not also feel that they're fully or partly a gay man in a woman's body or a lesbian in a man's body. They may identify primarily as bi or straight. If you called somebody a fag back in the day or a dyke, that was a derogatory term. It's not so much anymore.
Queer, when I was growing up, you didn't say that, but it's taken back with pride. And so we see a lot of, my father was a minister, and so Christian at some point, you'd get thrown to the lions if you said that at some point in time. But fag is actually, it means little stick or cigarette. So if you go to some countries and they smoke, they're going to ask you for a fag. And if you look at them, like, you got to, again, understand the context.
Right. So let's talk about those 4 components for me, right? So there's this gender identity at birth, which was assigned male. There's my gender expression, which was feminine and female. There's also my gender identity, identified as female. So so being male and female, that makes me a transgender person. And then my sexual orientation, I'm attracted to women. I'm a lesbian woman, so I identify as a lesbian. See how those different components can come to play, and they can be different. They can be different. They don't all need to be followed a straight line. It's usually a big squirrely 7, Z type thing. Non-binary spectrum of gender identities, quickly going through this: homosexual, queer, erotic reality, queer. This is the catch-all identity, and this is one that we won back for the community. And here we go. This is a queer community right there. These are all queer individuals who identify as queer. So, wow, there's so many terms under here. It's important to realize also each group may have different needs, may consort in separate communities. Someone who's part of the genderqueer community may never be involved in the transgender community, but they may be involved in a more cisgender community. Or somebody who's non-binary, they dwell in different places. They may also be members of other cultures and religions. If you go into China, or into Thailand with the lady boys, and I mentioned the Mahu in Hawaii, and the Hydra in India, and the two-spirited individuals here in the United States. So different places have different ways of being. So, and there you have it. And here's some of the flags that we use community right in there. So any questions for us?
This is good. I think, wow, we got it with 3 minutes to spare.
I have one question. Earlier, you were talking about what was popular terms right now was genderqueer. When you say popular, do you mean popular in regards to, like Gillian was saying, when you're a child and you're like influenced, and so you're like, oh, all these people are dressing a certain way. Is that the popular that you mean? Or do you mean popular as far as media is promoting?
Both. It means both.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it means both, really. So because it is represented a lot in the media, and we see that. It's important to note that somebody who identifies as genderqueer is genderqueer, not transgender. If somebody says, I'm genderqueer, that means that's my identity. This is how it's not about gender for me. It's just about this expression. Okay. And so
not everybody would identify as genderqueer. That's why I like to find out about them as well, even though the term might be out there. So that's a great question.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
So all these terms, again, it's the ideology. Did the younger generation come up with these? Because I remember Marilyn said that every generation seems to create their own terminology. So how did all these definitions, I know you put out all of these under these umbrellas, and it's like, oh my God, it's a lot to take in.
That umbrella used to be so much simpler just 5 years ago. Just 5 years ago, it was different.
Oh my God.
So it does change. But listen, in the 20, okay, so let's go back to the 19th century when we started to pathologize all of this stuff. So Magnus Hirschfeld said transvestite. So this is somebody who didn't conform to, we didn't talk about gender, and there was no surgeries really. However, we can go back thousands of years ago to the Roman Empire, and there was actually a Roman emperor who put out a reward to the kingdom for anyone who could medically transition him to a woman would receive half the Roman Empire. And so that idea of surgery goes back thousands of years, but we really didn't see it in medical textbooks until the 20th century. And that's when we came up with the term transsexual. in the early 20th century. So yeah, at that point, these were doctors now who were creating these terminologies. And then into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were starting to see different movements, you know, and different ways of expressing our faith and gender identity and using different terms. We became more woke with the universe, if you will. Then other terms started to evolve from there. Oh, I'm unisex, man, or I'm androgynous. You know, and so we started to see the evolution. So yeah, each generation will come up with their own terminology to use. Go ahead.
Other cultures do that as well. Okay, my father was a minister, and so everybody was Christian. But then there were more liberal Christians, and then there were more Reformed Christians, and my husband's Jewish, and so we saw that. You know, again, in terms that maybe years ago everybody was just thrown into, I have two nieces who happen to be African American. So years ago, we didn't say that. So you see these terms that are coming out, although that was true for them. It was just the terms that come out that people, I think, are more comfortable about. But that doesn't mean everybody would want to define themselves by those terms. We're talking.
And ultimately, that person will tell you how they would prefer to be referred to as, or how they identify, what terms they might identify with. And we're going to make mistakes all the time. And even after they say to you, I use they and them pronouns, and you start going and you confuse the pronouns, you correct, make a course correction, apologize, and move forward. No need to dwell on it. You know, go ahead, Gillian.
Are these universal terms that are used like in all these different countries? I mean, we're here in the United States, so we're hearing it. But is this something, these terms now everywhere? Because you are both involved with international associations for gender.
Well, I always say, and I never as a kid understood that our world got smaller. Our world got smaller when the information highway changed. And we started, you know, first there was the invention of the printing press. Oh my gosh. And now everybody can get a Bible in their hands, you know, but look at what the internet did to us. It connected us in a way. I had a pen pal in the 1980s. He lived in China. I would write him a letter. It took him maybe a month before he got my letter, and then it took another month. So my correspondence was 3 months apart, and he was in a different time zone. But now I can call up that person through Zoom, like we are right here, right now, and talk to them instantaneously. So with this much communication that's going on, there's more people connecting, and this is how at one point, the trans community felt they were alone in the world. And now, not so much. They may still feel alone, but they have a place to reach out through the internet highway.
You're also talking about different cultures and language. I know, Jessica, your family is Hispanic. So right. Do they have all of these words or a range of words in the Hispanic communities?
Well, that's the point I'm making, is that when these terms go out there into the information highway, some kid sees that term and say, oh, wait, I identify with that term. And then all of a sudden that becomes a term. I remember talking about these terms to a group of high school students, where a young man in the front, I would ask the question, are there any other terms we may have heard that you may not be familiar with? And some kid raises his hand and says, yes, Miss Jessica, thuggerella. And I'm like, thuggerella? That's a new one to me. What does thuggerella mean? Do you know what that means? He's like, yeah, I think what that means is that this guy, he hangs out with all his homies, and he dresses up like a thug, but you know, he likes pink and stuff. So they'll call him a thuggerella. And I'm like, well, there you go, class. There's a new term, thuggerella. At the end of the class, the young man approached me. He goes, yo, Miss Jessica. I was just kidding. There's no such thing as thuggerella. I'm like, well, you may have said that during class, and somebody in class may have said, I like that term. I think I'm going to use it. And now it becomes part of our umbrella. So in my Spanish culture, they still use the word transvesti, which is transvestite or a crossdresser. But a transvesti doesn't always necessarily mean that they're transgender. It means that they could be a gay man who likes to wear women's clothing. So yes, when you're looking across cultures, especially with pronouns, it changes. And I showed you that neutra word. I've heard that a lot, like in Australia, even in some places in Europe, especially in Great Britain. So they use that term a lot for people who may identify as genderqueer here in the United States. So yeah, it changes. But again, this information highway that I'm talking about on the internet, we see these terms being thrown out there. And if somebody says, I like that term, I'm going to start using it. This is why we have so many of them to offer you right now, because at some point somebody said, I feel comfortable with this, and other people felt comfortable with that. And in the end, we all want to feel like we belong to something greater than we are. And so to become part of this group means, okay, I belong to something more.
Hi. And also the interesting part, I see that little granddaughter and she's going to grow up with all kinds of words.
That's
I
right.
love you too. I love you too. And when you see the flag also, when we started with the flag, what has changed about the flag is that we've added the black and brown colors to really, of course, be inclusive. And that didn't happen at the beginning. That didn't happen. So I love the colors.
And we added the transgender colors there. Some people might ask where the transgender colors came from. We see pink and blue. Does anybody know the origins behind pink and blue? We decided that pink was for girls and blue is for boys. Because actually, if you go back in time, it was the opposite. It meant that if you were wearing pink, you were a person of stature. And back in hundreds of years ago, who were the people in stature? Was it women? Nope, it was men. And they were the ones who would buy the pink. They wanted to be as vibrant as possible. They were the ones who wore high-heeled shoes and stockings. They were the ones who wore powdered wigs and makeup. You know why? Because it was about presenting that. So pink was traditionally a very masculine color, and blue being more subdued, more nature, more calm. This was more of a feminine trait, you know. That was, you know, more feminine color. So if you look back at pictures of women in the 1800s, look at the colors they're wearing. Is it pink and vibrant colors? No, it was usually grays, dark blues, blacks, blue. You know, if you were wearing anything that other than that, then that meant you had money. That meant your husband had money and you were able to afford those things. So we switched that around, and there's some pagan roots behind this idea of pink and blue, because during the Nazi occupation in Germany, they would capture anyone who was different, because there was a race of super people that Hitler was trying to create, and so they would put labels on people who were effeminate. If they were a gay man, they wore a pink label. So, and this is where the color pink started to be associated with feminine. And so, and then there was, of course, marketing and people in the triangle. There was in the 1950s and 60s, there was this huge push for women to get out of blues and grays, because a lot of them, when we went to war, were wearing, you know, more military looking colors. And so they created this whole pink culture to kind of do the opposite of that, to glorify the woman in a feminine way. And so it evolved over time, this idea of pink and blue. So it's interesting just to see how this all plays out. Go ahead, Gillian, because we ran out of time here, but that's okay.
You know, I'm sitting here and I'm going, I know there's so many layers. This onion just keeps peeling and peeling and peeling away. And that little piece of blue and pink is fascinating, because no one ever, that's something you don't think about. And we've grown up with it. But our time is
now kids are growing with gender reveal parties, and I have another thing I could talk about those things.
I know you are a plethora of information between the two of you. Marilyn?
Besides, we didn't even talk about sign language, and it's different. And so the sign for trans men, if they're coming into becoming, if they were born a male and they're becoming a trans woman, it's T from up here, the male to the female. And if they're becoming a trans man, from the female to the male. And if they're kind of hanging out somewhere, here's, very, very.
No, and Marilyn, at the last conference, we found out that some of the sign language that you knew for gender was different and we had somebody who said, oh, they changed that in sign language, so gender is like this. And
That's right.
It's interesting.
That's right. It will change in sign language and around the world. It changes. I mean, there's different sign language. This is the I love you, which is an international sign. I hope that never changes.
Or rock out, that's another.
Well, ladies, I love you. And is this it? This is
I love you, yeah.
And the rock out. And this is
hang 10, yes.
This is Shaka, you know, we love you. So this is so amazing. It's like blown out. And so we look forward to more of this next week. Thursday, 11:30 to 12:30 Hawaii time, right here on the same Zoom link with Jessica and Marilyn and everybody else who wants to join in. I'm so appreciative. Thank you for all that you've done and are doing for the people in the world that need to know their place. And maybe some of us have learned something about being true to ourselves, no matter what it is, and no matter who we think it is.
Stars to you, and we'll have some other guests next week too to tell their stories as well. So thank you. Thank you.
Mwah. Aloha.
Aloha.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Jessica, you gonna end it?
Yes, I can end it on my end here for sure.
Okay.